There's no mistaking it. Animal Crossing may be about a lot of things, but above all else, it's about them animals. Those little critters that inhabit our villages and our islands have befriended countless Animal Crossing players over the course of around 20 years, establishing their places in the hearts of millions with their adorable or not so adorable faces and hilarious quirks. But if you ask fans how they feel about the personalities of these villagers, you will get some varied answers. Some love how friendly and welcoming they are in modern games. Others don't. They're too nice now, some say. They were too harsh in the older games, others say. And many still complain that since the Wii iteration of Animal Crossing, the villagers are simply too bland compared to how they were in games like Population Growing, the GameCube version, and Wild World. But from an analytical standpoint, what makes a villager's personality effective or ineffective? Why do so many miss the downright hateful villagers from Wild World? And why do people complain about the villagers' personality portrayals now when they're pretty much nothing but nice? In this video, I intend to attempt an in-depth analysis concerning what makes villager personalities good or bad. Naturally, to some degree, this is a matter of opinion, and despite my attempts to remain objective, the fact stands that not everybody likes the same kinds of people or personalities, and not everybody plays Animal Crossing for the same reasons. So, I'd also love to know what you think about villager personalities and their portrayals over time. Please feel free to comment below with your own thoughts and opinions as respectfully as you can. Now, without further ado, let's jump into this discussion. For those of you who are unaware, it is imperative that we discuss the basics first. Namely, what villager personalities are, how many different kinds there are, and what sets them apart from each other. Those of you who know about all this, or simply don't care, can check the description of this video for timestamps, so you can maneuver past this part, but I hope you'll bear with me as this is important to the discussion. Instead of coding unique dialogue for every single villager in the entire series, the developers chose to give certain groups of villagers one of several personalities, which are essentially dialogue subsets. In Animal Crossing Population Growing, and Animal Crossing Wild World, and Animal Crossing City Folk, also known as Animal Crossing Let's Go to the City and Power Regions, there are a total of 6 different personalities. Male villagers may have the lazy, jock, or cranky personality types, while female villagers may have the normal, peppy, or snooty personality types. Beginning with New Leaf, players could interact with 2 additional personalities, Smug for males, and Big Sis, or Uchi, for females. Each one of these villager personalities are unique. They have their own dialogue, and through that dialogue it is suggested that these 8 personalities have their own likes, dislikes, goals, fears, and quirks. Especially quirks. To quickly summarize what makes each personality stand out, lazies are youthful, obsessed with food, and love to relax. Jocks are obsessed with exercise and fitness, excitable with a zeal for life, and at least a little dumb. Crankies are older, reserved, and typically a little hostile, or at least bitter. Smugs are somewhat self-absorbed, suave, or at least they try to be, and dramatic. For the ladies, normals are motherly and kind, but also sensitive and easily worried. They're not as quirky as the others, hence they're normal. Peppies are youthful, excitable, and aspire to be popular or famous. Snooties are self-absorbed, classy or posh, and elitist. And Big Sisters are tough and bold, but they have a sweet and timid side. In each game, these personalities vary substantially. Some quirks are unique to certain games. In Wild World, normals were much more nervous and loud. In New Leaf, smugs were much more flirtatious than in New Horizons. Jocks, meanwhile, tend to focus less on their muscles in Population Growing compared to later games in the series. But the differences in these personalities' portrayals in each installment of the Animal Crossing series are what have created such a controversy among the community. Many complain that the crankies are no longer cranky compared to how they were in the first 2 games in the series, and snooties seemed oftentimes indistinguishable from normals in some games, such as New Leaf. But is it necessarily a bad thing that crankies are no longer cranky, and that snooties are no longer their old hateful selves? These are just a few examples of what we will be exploring in the rest of this video. I've given this quite a bit of thought, probably not nearly enough, and I've narrowed down a few attributes of personalities that, when addressed in certain ways, may be what make them particularly effective under the right circumstances. These 3 attributes are heart, insanity, and paradox. Put them together, and it spells hit. But what are all these about? Well, it's not enough for each of these attributes to be present in order for them to work. For example, a villager may be extremely quirky, so quirky that it's difficult to connect with them, or even so quirky that they become annoying, even if they have plenty of heart besides. But if one of these attributes is missing, the personality is weaker. But before I explain away everything now, let's just go ahead and discuss the first and arguably most in-depth attribute. The first Animal Crossing, Population Growing, was advertised as a game that keeps on playing, whether you're there or not. Aside from the real-time clock, this slogan is no truer than it is through the villagers who really make the game seem alive. Sometimes a conversation with a villager can feel astonishingly natural, and the relationships that you can build with them result in some serious emotional investment. There are a number of reasons why this effect is achieved, but it's the great dialogue that really sells it. Villagers talk about all sorts of things, but it's not always about digging up fossils or fishing or catching bugs or decorating houses, which is pretty much the bulk of what you do in the game. They also talk about doing laundry, traveling to other towns, cooking. They discuss what they had for lunch, the weather, cravings, wishes. Sure, you never see Mitzi hanging her clothes up to dry, and you never see her bake any pies either, but she says she does it, and there's not really any reason not to believe her. Things like this suggest a layer of depth to these characters, a reminder that when you're not looking, these villagers have their own lives to live. This is an area where Population Growing particularly excels, with several villagers talking about their daily chores, interactions and plans with other villagers and unseen characters, such as nieces or boyfriends, keeping up with the weather forecast and complaining when they feel like they have to lug an umbrella around all day because somebody was wrong. It's these little touches that really bring an essence of life to these characters. Although villagers' aliveness is certainly felt through their spoken dialogue, interactions with villagers through letters are not to be overlooked. Since Population Growing, players have been able to send mail to villagers in town with responses depending on a number of factors. In Population Growing and Wild World, the system was quite rudimentary, with villagers in Population Growing notorious for complaining about not being able to understand the letters they got. If they did understand them, however, they typically followed a randomized format, not really responding to the content of the letters they had received. Beginning with city folk, however, villagers came across as slightly more aware in their letters, being able to recognize more details about the contents of the messages you sent them, at least a little bit. New Horizons particularly impressed me a few months ago when I sent Pashmina a belated happy birthday card, which she fully understood as a birthday card despite the fact her birthday event had passed. It was a nice little detail that made Pashmina just a little more real. Whenever you can interact with a character in a way that is more than just multi-option responses, that can really add to the heart and depth of a character. Letters are a key example of this, and City Folk really is largely to thank for that step in the right direction. But City Folk is also notorious for having the most watered-down, bland, boring personalities in the series, and with good reason. In most games in the series, you can talk to a villager multiple times in a row, and they will say something different, most of the time. In City Folk, however, if you try to talk to a villager multiple times in a row, they may repeat the exact same phrase over and over again until you leave the area and meet them again. This robotic lack of spontaneity makes these villagers a little better than any other NPC you talk to in any other game. It makes them practically lifeless. The dialogue lacks heart because it lacks life. New Leaf corrected this by having more dialogue that was less repetitive, bringing back the conversation style of the first two games. New Horizons continued this, though it also had the problem of repetitive dialogue to a lesser extent. When you talk to a villager in New Horizons for the first time that day, depending on the time of day, the villager will typically say one of a few different lines of dialogue, usually one dialogue box long. At first this isn't so bad, but the sameness of it from day to day gets super noticeable. It's not as bad as City Folk, but it's still a hindrance. It's like having to climb over a fence to get to any real dialogue. But of course, heart isn't just about seeming alive, it's also about having compassion. That being said, we hear so often that many players prefer the meaner villagers and resent the nothing but niceness of now. Why? Well, one might argue that the niceness in New Leaf, in particular, feels forced, because you're the mayor or something, like they're holding back. But I feel like this is only part of the big picture. To fully understand why many folks prefer the meanness of villagers in the past, and why the niceness of today is falling so flat, we should consider our next 2 points. What possible benefit could insanity have in an Animal Crossing game? A game where people come to relax and unwind. A game where we seek peace in our otherwise crazy lives. There's a quite simple explanation. It's just plain funny. It's no secret that our furry, feathery, and scaly friends in the Animal Crossing world are just a little off. Not necessarily in a dangerous way, but certainly in an entertaining, memorable way. This insanity abounded in population growing in Wild World. Mood swings, temper tantrums, exaggerated offense, brutal insults, and just plain wacky stuff graced the dialogue of these early games in the series. Population growing handled this masterfully. See this dialogue from a jock. "It's so sunny out today. Are you starting to feel the heat, Ethan?" "All right, now watch me absorb the heat." "Rah! It's my superpower." Wild World also embraced this insanity. Before asking to visit my house, Bunny once outright told me, "I'm bored. Talking to you is boring. Stop boring me." Normals are also a little on the crazy side, but only a little, with normals having a best friend named Moppina, who is a literal mop that they dress up and talk to like an imaginary friend. Maybe that's Moppina now that I think about it. Oh well, I guess it really doesn't matter. The letters, though only 4 lines long, seem to be even crazier, trying to fit in as much as they can in such little space. I do feel like this is a little too crazy and a bit too fill-in-the-blank to be personable, but maybe I'm getting nitpicky. This insanity was toned down, starting with city folk, with crankies, snooties, and normals taking the hardest hits, becoming much nicer and blander. Peppies, however, remained in excellent form. Some of my favorite lines of dialogue include, "Make this your top action item, reprioritize your inbox, get me my fishy!" And, "Finally, it's mine, all mine! Bwah, bwah, 1-1. There's something unsettling about them, despite how sweet and friendly they are at other times. Even New Horizons capitalizes on this from time to time, though not as frequently or skillfully as City Folk. I heard they were using the vaulting pole to jump over all the rivers. I like to scream when I do that. Or when they sing the "Stick Thing" song, complete with disclaimer. It's a subtle crazy, but it's an excellent balance that remains memorable, funny, and even lovable. New Leaf had some crazy from time to time, but it was subdued, or just plain ineffective a lot of the time. Consider this line from a lazy villager. "Do you ever talk to the TV, Ethan? I get so excited when I'm watching cooking shows, I'm always shouting things like, 'I'm so hungry!' and 'Give me some of that!' I know it sounds doofy, but I just can't help myself." I don't know, this just seems like a bit of a stretch to me. The latter one makes some sense, but that first one, "I'm so hungry," it's just kind of hard to believe. New Horizons, however, did bring back some of the insanity that was missed from prior games, though perhaps not quite enough. The dialogue is particularly better with lazies, who repeatedly talk about the bugs in their floor. Admittedly, the gag may be used a bit too much, but it's a good gag. They even have a hilarious dialogue sequence about how everything is just a game. Smugs, essentially the male Peppies of New Horizons, also have several great lines of dialogue, including this one. "How's the face treating you today, Ethan? I heard about your wasp sting. I played wasp sting victim number 3 in R&B Vampire, so I know a thing or two about treating stings." Yes, R&B Vampire is a real movie, even though I filmed it in my basement. Especially because I filmed it in my basement. This reads like something straight out of the older games. The knee-jerk fury, the steady descent and the crazier and crazier, the short-sightedness of it all. It's perfectly crafted insanity. And that's just it. Insanity in Animal Crossing is a delicate balance. You don't want to be too harsh, but you also don't want to reduce your humor to friendly kidding around like a New Leaf snooty villager. Every game has solid examples, but some have more than others. And I think we can safely say that the more carefully crafted insanity there is, the more entertaining and engaging and memorable the dialogue will be, even if you do lose some wallpaper in the process. So, we've discussed heart, and we've discussed insanity. There's something to be said for a genuinely kind villager, but their kindness needs to be off-balanced by enough insanity to make them unpredictable. All of this together helps bring them to life, and makes the dialogue fun to read. But villagers aren't just a good book with funny or cute lines. Villagers are your best friends, or worst enemies, for a reason, and merely delivering effective punchlines and saying nice things is not enough to establish a heart-to-heart connection with a polygonal anthropomorphic critter in your Nintendo DS. There is at least one more aspect to villager personalities that makes them, and really any other character, incredibly complex and effective. What is a paradox? A paradox is when something is simultaneously true and not true. It's the gray area where black and white intersect. The real world is full of gray areas. Paradoxes are true to life, and it is these paradoxes that bring characters to life. Consider this scenario. You're playing Animal Crossing Wild World, and you meet a little bear cub named Maple. Maple is a normal villager. Everyone else in town is incredibly quirky and strange, maybe even downright rude. But Maple is kind and welcoming. She is softer than her hard-headed neighbors, with a nature sweeter than the tart or even sour dispositions the other folks in town may have. You connect with Maple quickly. When you want to reach out for someone to talk to, Maple is there, always ready to add some sunshine to your day. As you've moved to a new town and loneliness is setting in, Maple counteracts it. She convinces you in a natural heart-to-heart sort of way that both of you are very much alike. You're both just two level-headed folks in a crazy town. But as you get to know Maple, while this doesn't necessarily become a false representation of her, it certainly isn't all there is to her. As you talk to her more, you learn that despite her friendliness and open-arm policy toward her new neighbor, she's actually quite lonely. You learn she plays with a mop, fondly named Moppina, or Moppina, as a sort of imaginary best friend. You learn that she has some deep-set insecurities, that she doesn't feel that she's truly a nice person, that she isn't all that good at what she does, that she isn't crazy enough to get the most out of life. Despite her being an encourager and supportive figure, she needs validation. She's simultaneously a rock while being vulnerable to attacks from her own internal struggles. She's simultaneously the friendliest person in the village while also being one of the loneliest. She thinks she's normal, even too normal, but she's actually a lot quirkier than she realizes. While she radiates a sort of light, there's a deep-set darkness that she alone cannot fight. These paradoxes make Maple a vessel of incredible character design. She has heart for miles. She has just enough insanity to keep you surprised, entertained, and maybe even a little bit concerned. But these two aspects, for the most part, don't run parallel to each other. They intersect. Maple's light is just as much a part of her as her darkness is. She is a flawed character, beautifully flawed, and this makes her character believable, engaging, and memorable. She is such a great mix of give and take, peace and chaos, and joy and lamentation that you find yourself adoring the little bear. And when a paradox much like this shines in a villager, that villager becomes alive. Snooties may usually be mean to you, but from time to time you'll catch them confessing a shortcoming. They are not the perfect, graceful statuettes they claim they believe themselves to be. Indeed, they know they aren't. Crankies may be rude, hateful, and distant, but they have soft spots and genuinely care about you, even if they act like they don't. Big sis types may act tough and rugged. Indeed, they may be tough and rugged, but they can also be incredibly shy and squishy, more so than normals, in rare instances when they're outside of their comfort zone. They have their own insecurities and weaknesses despite their boldness and strength. These paradoxes make characters more than obligatory moral support or forced comedy relief. They're more than beefy meatheads, sleepy gluttons, or sweet smiles along your walk through town. They're people with feelings, goals, weaknesses, strengths, values, etc. When villagers exhibit paradoxes in a believable human way, that's when their personalities are truly their most effective, no matter how much heart or insanity they may have otherwise. As a general rule, though, when it comes to writing any dialogue, the more fun you're having, the better the outcome will be. I feel like the writers had an absolute ball writing Population Growing's dialogue, but New Horizons' comes across somewhat like a chore in some cases. Instead of focusing on the heart, insanity, and paradox of each villager type, they risk checking boxes, making them positive enough, modern enough, or just outright limited to past tropes of meat-headedness or bookishness. When the writers aren't afraid to pour themselves, their own humanity, their own heart, insanity, and paradox into the dialogue, that's when it really shines, and that's when we love it best. No, population growing in Wild World did not always handle it perfectly. No, New Horizons villagers aren't all bland and empty. Even city folks' personalities have positive points. And just because the hip factor isn't perfected, a rare and difficult task to be fair, it doesn't mean that some fulfillment of it isn't there. Still, the more of it there is, I think it's pretty safe to say that the better the personality portrayal is. And again, we all have different types and preferences when it comes to the people we connect with. It's true for real life, and it's true for Animal Crossing. But people haven't been complaining about villager personalities on internet forums and YouTube videos so much for no reason. And hopefully this shines some light on why their concerns exist, and honestly why they're valid. And of course, you are entitled to like who you like. If you love and adore a jock villager from New Leaf and you'd bawl your eyes out if he left, that's all you. I may never understand it, but that's your preference. And the hip factor, while a clue into the big picture, certainly isn't all there is to liking and disliking villagers. Nevertheless, I encourage you to use it as a guide to understanding why maybe a New Horizons villager falls flat for you, while a Wild World villager does not. I hope it helps, and I hope you enjoyed. But what do you think? Do you completely disagree with my point of view? Have I put into words that nagging feeling you just couldn't piece together up until now? Is my attempt at objective analysis falling as flat as the portrayal of snooty villagers in New Leaf? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to see your own thoughts on the matter. Hopefully our dialogue with each other will help us better understand this, and maybe, just maybe, Nintendo will care. Don't count on it, though. Above all else, please be kind to one another in your comments. Everyone plays Animal Crossing for their own reasons, and our goal should be to see the different perspectives making up the big picture of what the fans of Animal Crossing like and dislike about personality design. And fun. It's about fun, too. Thanks for watching, and be good, everyone.